Hey, what's up? It's your pal, Mike Squires, and this is the Guitarist Podcast, episode number 236. I've done this 235 times before. Trust me. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm still doing it. This is the 236th time I've done it, and my guest this episode is Mike Varney. Mike Varney is a name which resonates deeply in the guitar world and has for decades. Mike Varney founded Shrapnel Records, helped launch the popularity of shred guitar through the 80s, was responsible for elevating the careers of tons of guitar players: Yngwie Malmsteen, Paul Gilbert, Greg Howe, Tony Macalpine, Marty Friedman, Jason Becker. So many people had a column called Spotlight, and was very much a known entity and a celebrity in his own right through this whole period. And I mean, I still admire him. So it was a really a big honor to have him on the show. And I want to thank my buddy Nils for putting me in touch with him. Thank you, Nils. Hopefully I'll actually meet Mike in person in Vegas next month. So I had a great time talking with Mike. He shares a few stories about the old days, talks about the early development and establishment of the label, and just sort of surviving through the music climate change of the 90s. And he pivoted into releasing like blues and prog and jazz records, and stays active to this day in the music world. So he mentions he's producing a record now as we speak. So even in his retirement, working tirelessly. So that is very admirable. I hope that you enjoy this episode. If you know, especially if you are my age, I'm 50. If you're my age, you know the name Mike Varney, and you know Shrapnel Records, and you know so many of these players that he talks about and mentions. So hope that you enjoy this. If you are enjoying the Guitarist Podcast or the quarantine videos that I produce, please, by all means, support us at patreon.com/couchriffs. Your support is what makes this happen. Continued support through Patreon is what will allow me to focus more clear energy into developing and growing this and making it into what it deserves to be, what I believe it deserves to be, and it's seeing its full potential. So thank you for your support if you are already supporting, and thank you for considering if this little speech had any influence on you. I would also like to thank my sponsor, Variety Coffee Roasters, before we get into this episode. Variety, what can I say? Variety coffee is the shit. I drink it every single morning. No bullshit. Every morning, that's what I'm brewing up in my Chemex. When I'm away, my wife makes it in a French press. She loves it through the French press. We love it both ways around here. So what I would do if I was you, I'd go over there to varietycoffeeroasters.com. I'd check out their coffee offerings. You know what I drink? High Hopes. It's a single origin Ethiopian coffee that is espresso roasted, which means it's just a little bit darker, but not dark by sort of Starbucks, sort of levels. It's by those levels, it's a lightly roasted coffee. But in the specialty coffee world, this is roasted so that you can still taste the coffee itself. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm a coffee dick that way. Variety is my constant companion. If I could take it everywhere with me and brew it on the road, I would do it. So what are you waiting for? Go on over there. Tell them I sent you. Also, give them a follow on social media. They're great. They're funny. They should let me do their shit for them. It would be better, even. Still. Variety, I love you. We're going to get into it. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget the golden rule. You know the golden rule. Treat people the way that you want to be treated. It's not that hard, right? And don't be a dick. Mike, thank you for joining me. If we had a little bit of we got some tech. We got some tech stuff happening.
Yes, sir.
Um, it's my pleasure to have you on the podcast. It's funny to me when I think about all of the first impressions that I had as a young guitar player. Your name was as important as many guitar players to me, and I think for a lot of people who read your column, they felt the same way. Uh, so I guess the first thing I would say is just thank you for having such a big part of my musical development and so many people's.
It's my pleasure, believe me.
But also, it's funny because as I've grown up and had a moderate career of my own, I've met so many people, and there are those moments where you're like, holy shit, I'm talking to this person, fill in the blank, and they're just here they are, they're a person, whoever that person is, could legends. Is that a universal feeling for you? Like you've been involved with some of the biggest names in guitar music.
Well, I guess it was kind of my job, so
Right.
I never really thought that much about it. Um, I wish I had taken photos along the journey because I have very few, and it would have been nice to do it. But I thought, well, these are my artists or these are my friends or whatever. It looks kind of weird to start taking pictures, and so I never did. So there are some pictures out there that have taken place, but I probably had more pictures taken with artists since I retired than I
Right.
have back in the day.
What does retirement look like for you?
Well, let me think. I had a session in the studio till 2 a.m. producing a record with Stoney Curtis, who's a guitar player I've done a lot of records with over the years, and I just finished a record with a great guitar player by the name of Jason Walker, who's also a great singer and songwriter. And that record just got finished and it just got mixed. We're awaiting mastering right now. So I guess I'm doing a lot of stuff, but as far as worrying about all the other stuff, I'm not actively releasing records at this point.
Right.
I'm basically helping friends to make better products so that they can, you know, start their journey. As either a record company or to help them find a good label. And I've helped a number of people find labels and stuff. So I do that as for fun, or whatever,
Right.
friendship, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, you've been at this for when did you join your first band? In the 70s?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. What are you, a heavy metal guy or some other kind of guitar fan? What kind of fan are you of music?
All of my earliest music loves were hard rock and eventually heavy metal. I got into a lot of the Shrapnel artists, but I quickly realized I didn't have the natural talent or the discipline to overcome that lack to be that kind of player.
I can certainly understand that. I'm sorry, whatever frustration these guitar players, caused. I think that the grunge movement, in part, was rebellion against having to play a million notes in order to get a gig. I think it
Right.
got to the point where uh, it just got to be ridiculous. I think, and people just said no, bring back rock and roll.
Right.
And um, but no, I was in an early punk band, and the band started in '76. I joined them, I think, in either '76 or '77, '77 probably, and that could have been '76. But anyway, played with Blondie and the Ramones and the Dictators and Television and all those early kind of punk bands, and that was fun. I played bass in that because they didn't have a bass player. And then I got in a band with a guy named John Cipollina, who was on the cover of Guitar Player magazine, and his guitar rig was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he had a band called Quicksilver Messenger Service, which is a huge band in the Fillmore days
Sure.
of San Francisco and the psychedelic scene. And we had a singer called Rocky Sullivan. It was basically his band, but we went to LA and did 8 shows with Budgie at the Whiskey. And
With Budgie.
Budgie's that power trio that,
Oh, I
Metallica
love
covered the song.
Budgie.
They covered Bread Fan. And so anyway, I got to play with them. That was cool. And and a lot of other things too. I wrote a musical with a friend Bob Heyman and Marty Ballin, who was the singer of the Starship Jefferson Airplane. And we had the rhythm section from Y&T, Leonard Hayes, Phil Kennemore in the live show. At one point we had Jeff Pilson pre-Dokken as lead singer, and my friend Jesse Bradman, who's played in a ton of big bands. We had him as he was the original star of the show. It was live at Bill Graham's old Waldorf in San Francisco and some other venues, and EMI picked it up and we made a record, and it was not really great, and it was kind of salvaged live recordings that were never meant to be a record. But we did the best we could, and that came out in 1980. And at that time is when I finally figured, it's time to start a record label. So I was 22 years old and had a degree in business with a specialization in marketing. And I thought, well, I can't just start a label and compete with Capitol Records and Columbia Records and whatnot. And also, as a guitar and a metal fan at the time, I really wanted to let people know what they were going to get when they bought one of my records. That was really important to me, that I establish a brand, and that
Right.
when someone's looking at the store at one of my records and thinking, well, do I buy this or not? It kind of looks good. I wanted them to go, oh, it's on Shrapnel. This has got to have some guitar stuff on it. And so that was the reason behind not just being the first heavy metal label on the scene here, but also specializing in guitar abilities, because that was the main thing for me about a band, pretty much, that drew me in was the guitar playing. I love a lot of bands that have minimalist uh, attitudes about guitar, but at the time I figured that in the 70s we had Van Halen, in the 60s we had Hendrix. I think both those guys were pretty much the undisputed game changers for those decades. And I thought, well, someone's going to do it for the 80s. And it was the beginning of 1980. And I thought, man, I'm going to try to be the guy that finds the next guy. So that was my thought at 22 years old in 1980. That's what I wanted to do.
Right. Do you think that you accomplished that mission?
Well, I did in some respects. I mean,
Yeah.
I certainly, I wouldn't say I accomplished that mission completely, but I would say that I certainly helped shape a genre and popularize it. And, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I would be. Um, the astounding thing to me is all of the things that you had accomplished already at age 22 when you formed the label.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because I was going to college and taking breaks and going down to LA and doing runs at the Whiskey a couple of times, and played Winterland, which is a huge deal, a couple of times.
Yeah.
Winterland is where all the bands at the time were playing, whether they be Yes, UFO, Rush, all that. Um, Everybody played Winterland that came through town. That was the big venue. So yeah, I did pretty much as I could for a local guy, and I wanted to get married, and I'm still married, and I didn't want to be broke. I figured
Why
that,
not?
yeah, I just figured, if I'm successful in going the distance with a band, then that would caused me to be away from my fiance or wife, as it was planned at the time, and I just didn't want to. I felt like I'd be working against myself. Hey, I'm building a relationship here, and I'm tearing it down on the other side. if my
Sure.
if my goal of having success as a musician were, if that was to be, if I was successful at that, then that would mean I'm home a lot less. So I wanted to do something where I could stay, at home and have a life. And also, I figured there were a lot of, I was finding a lot of people that were, better than I was, and I thought I'd rather put down, a lot of bets, bet on myself.
I wish I was as observant as you were at
Yeah,
22.
it was really not a. Yeah, I didn't have any ego about being a guitar player. I wanted to be a guitar player, but I also wanted to be successful. And I just kind of looked at everything, you know, very realistically and thought, this
Yeah.
is, if I get everything that I want, then I'm just going to be gone and not having the relationship I want with my fiance. So,
And that's not getting everything you want.
yeah, and I was a record collector and such a heavy duty record collector that I was always the guy that would have somebody come over and they go, God, how many thousand records have you got? And who are these bands? I've never heard of them, and I'll put them on and they go, oh my God, that's one of the greatest things I've ever heard. How come no one's ever heard of them? So I just really had a deep love of, that kind of recorded media, and I hated cassettes though, for the record. And I can't believe they had to come back, but I wanted to, add to that because, that was a living, piece of, future archaeological, you know, uh, history. If people were going back and digging through a blown up, building from a society that destroyed itself. Just joking. Uh, you know, maybe they'd find one of those records and go, "What was this?" And oh my God, listen to this guy play guitar. Uh, but no, I just wanted to contribute to the annals of recorded history, music history, and I thought that would be a more noble, if anything, aspiration than trying to be a rock star. I figured I know a million people trying to be rock stars. I don't know that many people trying to be record companies. This is, I just took the bigger challenge, but also looked at the results. You know, the potential of it in a time when uh, heavy metal and guitar playing, even though Eddie Van Halen had just come out in '78 and was of course, actually, when I played the Starwood in '77, I've got a flyer somewhere, and it had the band I was in playing one day, and like Van Halen, I think, playing a day or two later.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
so I knew about Van Halen, before he made it. But when that record came out, it was kind of a game changer. And I have to say, I'm sure that Shrapnel discouraged some people from trying to make a living playing guitar. I know that Van Halen sort of discouraged me from it. I thought, well, I've already sat in my bedroom for all these years at my parents', you know, uh, expense, learning how to play guitar for what was considered to be pretty good at that time. But I could see things were going in another direction. But then, as much as Van Halen was rising, we had this whole rebellion, with the punk scene, and which was,
Right.
no guitar solos, minimalist, minimal guitar solos. It was a situation where kind of metal was kind of getting forced out. Labels were like, okay, we need to sign more punk bands. Hey, now we need to soften that up and make it, call it new wave. It's like, from Elvis to Pat Boone or whatever. It's like, hey, we start off with the
Right.
Sex Pistols. Now we end up with, Pat Benatar into the same, genre, which was interesting because, you know, uh, it seems like there's always more people out there without talent than there are people with talent. And when raise the bar too high, the public, responds and rebels and goes out and invents the kind of music where, in 2 years, anybody can be a contender. And I think that rebellion happened, to the with the punk scene, rebelling against, all of that. And then I think, probably around 1990 with the grunge and kind of newer punk revival, I think that was sort of, another, uh, rising up against the enemy, because when you get to a point where you've got to be able to play guitar with such a high skill to get a gig, you know, at a certain point, like I said, there's less people out there who can do it. So they just
Do
sort of
you
get
think that
together and
there's
create their own
do,
genre and declare everybody else uncool. It's like just like politics,
right?
exactly like politics.
Do you think there's a point of diminishing return where, you know, the more technical ability someone has and the more sort of more of a fireworks display they are putting off, that the less attention span people have for it? Like fireworks go off in the sky and we're on the ground. So it's like, look at those. All
Well,
right, let's go. Um,
I like to ascend to a higher place. So I I, don't, I would
sure.
I don't mind leaving the ground, but I'm hopefully not anytime soon, and hopefully that's where I'm headed. I'm joking, but well, I think that I think that it was kind of funny, like in everything else, like football or let's say an Olympic sport, you know, you you don't get points for being bad. You don't get points for,
right.
hey, I'm running the 50-yard dash in 5 minutes. Oh yeah, that's great. Uh, you know, uh, hey, our baseball team just, we didn't get a single hit and we won. Uh, it was sort of a situation where uh, people had to dummy down their guitar skills to get gigs. Guys would go to audition for bands in 91 ish, and,
Yeah.
you know, they would have to hide the fact that they could play all that stuff because the public declared it uncool. And, you know, I have to admit, when I sit at home here and listen to records, I'm not pulling out the fastest guitar records to play. Uh,
Right.
I mean, because I've heard that for so many years, and I think it's awesome. And if somebody else comes out and does something new or whatnot, I'm all ears, and I may buy the record. But in general, I like a lot of other things besides that, and I know people that have a much bigger shred collection of records than I do, but
Sure.
I've been
Oh,
collecting more.
I like John Prine more than I like Chris and Pelletieri, but I appreciate them both.
You like Diamonds and Rust more than you like. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Uh, and John Prine certainly was a songwriter. And
Oh man.
yeah, he had a brother named Billy Prine, and I used to run into him just every once in a while. If the Prairie Sun Studios, where all the Shrapnel stuff was born, Billy Prine was a friend of the owners, and he
Oh
would
wow.
come around every once in a while. But that's a interesting reference, and I had something to throw in there. Uh, no, but I hear what you're saying. And so yeah, I think that music is great, and I'm glad that I helped to popularize it. And uh, when I'm in the mood, I'll put something on that's ridiculous. But I guess it's funny. It's kind of like a generational thing. Like parents, they can maybe barely handle Elvis, but then the Beatles come
Right.
in. Oh no, that's not gonna be good. And then 20 years later, some elevator music is playing a Beatles song. Oh, what a lovely song! Well, that's the Beatles, No, it can't be. Uh, and I think that's kind of the way it is with the guitar playing. It's not it's not for everybody, but you can't deny the musicality that some of these guys have. But to me, just like some people, okay, I can accept Elvis, but not the Beatles. It's kind of that way with some of the shred stuff. Because because of where my experience or whatever, and working with a lot of these guys, there was a lot more there to most anybody that I worked with, other than just playing a bunch of notes. Um, they were the right notes.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff now that's technically beyond, you know, in some ways beyond, or different techniques that are advanced. but a lot of times it just sounds like gymnastics to me. And that's funny that I could say that because people thought that I was a guy that was coming out with all this guitar stuff that didn't. Uh, I mean the naysayers, obviously not the many fans, but of the music, but they thought that was, for them, that was all they could handle. And now, and for me now, a lot of the newer stuff, I don't get the feel off of it that I would get off of any one of many of my artists. If you listen to Richie Kotzen right now, he's probably one of the greatest combination singer guitar players that ever lived, if not a candidate for the best one. And so a lot of these guys, they also grew up and, they have that fifth gear when they need it, but they don't always use it. They don't
Right.
have to use it. So I was seeing this quote. Ingve was said, people say less is more, more is more. And
Yeah, it's
I,
his most famous quote.
yeah, I think of the and that is something that I had said years ago too. That was my exact reaction to the first person who said that to me many years ago. And I guess you know you can say less is more as long as you can play more really well. You know,
Right.
if you say less is more because that's all you have to give, then that's not that's kind of BS. Uh,
Right.
so it's great when you see a guitar player. He's he's playing just exactly everything that the song needs. But then if it needs that fifth gear, the guy can shift into it. And you go, oh, I get it. Okay, this guy's got it in the wheelhouse, but he knows that it's a Greg Howe album, by the way. He's got it in his wheelhouse, but he's not going to use it because he's tasteful. And so yeah, I notice a lot of guitar players uh, as they mature, they started out learning all that stuff, but then you know their sense of musicality matures and music has changed, and so a lot of these guys have it if they need it. But also, what they have is not just the speed and the technique; it's that musicality of understanding the theory of all behind all that stuff. And some guys were just rotely throwing out, fast picking and whatnot. But that really wasn't what made an artist like Tony Macalpine. You have to really know everything else. Greg
Right.
Howe plays over all these wild chord changes because he knows. You know, Richie Kotzen knows. A lot of these guys, they really know music. Um, but the guys that came along thought, oh, this sounds like them. It's, it's just like speed picking, but no proper note choices and no interesting chords to play over and whatnot. So,
You have heard so many astoundingly technically proficient guitar players in your life. Like, when was the last time that you heard a guitar player and you were caught off guard and you were shocked at how good they were?
you know, it doesn't happen very often because it's it's hard to get better than a lot of the guys on my label. In,
Sure.
in fact, the only way to really, to me, the only way to better what was done by most of those artists, including Ingve and Paul Gilbert and Marty Friedman, Jason Becker, and Greg Howe, and Richie Kotzen, and Joey Tafoya, all these great guitar players. The only way to really get better would be, and by the way, as I get older, I omit really important names, and sometimes I omit the most important one, and it's not intentional. So I'm sorry if I miss talking about somebody I should. But
It would
yeah,
be hard to mention everyone that's
no, it would
important
it
on
would
your
be hard and
label.
it would take a long time. But yeah, I think that I think that nothing is going to probably impress me because if it's going to be anything better than that, it's probably not going to be musical. I think that a lot of my guys took it as far as it could go, and still sound like music. You know,
Right.
uh, some of this other stuff just sounds to me, and this is I'm the parent that said, I love Elvis Presley. Oh, the Beatles are just over the top. It's kind of like that. I'm looking at it as the next generation, looking back on that and thinking, well, this is great, but a lot of this new stuff is just playing excessively to play excessive, and that's what a lot of people thought about shrapnel artists. But there was something more there to most of them, or I wouldn't have signed them. I had plenty of guys that had motor skills, but it's more than motor skills and muscle memory. It's a brain and a sense of musicality. And a lot of these guys that are out there now, newer guys, they do have all that, and some have taken it further technically. And I think there's still the older school and the newer younger people that you know are blown away with hey, this guy's doing it on seven strings, and he's picking
Right.
faster, or he's got this legato technique that's advanced, and whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, I guess because I'm older and I'm mature and my listening is changed. I there's not much I could ever hear that would be faster, or you know you know what I'm saying, and have any meaning.
Right.
It might have seemed like it was excessive then, but people have taken the kind of influence from artists that I worked with, and have taken it to a new place. But in most cases, I buy it and I go, wow, that's really impressive. And then, I'll put it back in my CD collection and never play it again. So there's like I said, there are some guys that are influenced by those guys that are using it in a meaningful way. I can't think of anybody at the moment, but I know there are. And then there, are a lot of guys that are just, hey, this is amazing. Let's have 10 time changes, in the space of 2 minutes, and all that stuff. And that to me is just being complex and complicated for the sake of being complicated.
Right.
And then to me, I fall back into it like an old curmudgeon, and go, well, what's the point? If it's
So you're not a Mahavishnu Orchestra fan.
I no I certainly am, but what I'm saying is, I guess there's been an evolution, uh, and no, my Vishnu Orchestra are great.
Oh yeah.
But like I'm saying, there were some melodies in there and whatnot that would could stick with you. And to me,
Sure.
I can't really, if somebody's playing in an odd tuning and seven strings and playing a million miles an hour, and it's the John McLaughlin had compositions. So
Yes.
to me, some of the stuff that's coming out now is more just an exercise for a certain riff to live, or to show off, the ability to, in other words, their songs are vehicles for these techniques, or the musical knowledge, but the song still isn't uh, isn't served by any of that stuff, because that stuff is the song, I guess.
I have to imagine that some of the new artists who are, you know, progressive and technically over the top, that is also them trying to push, what has already happened
Yeah,
further,
I
and
know.
that
It's the same.
they'll mellow with age as well, and probably a lot of that is going to uh it's going to develop some really extraordinary music.
Yeah, who's really a great guitar player that you know I think most people probably know it, but if you've heard Phil X, right?
Oh sure.
Yeah, I mean, I saw him live and I thought, wow, this guy's really good. He had all the technique, but there were a lot of personality, types of things. There's a lot of personality in his guitar playing, and
Yes.
and he obviously isn't consummate, professional and a real musician. And there are a lot of guys out there, but like you're right, some of the other artists that we're referring to without mentioning names, some of them just yeah, they might get to the point where they can play every Paul Gilbert or Jason Becker, Marty Friedman, Richie Kotzen, Greg Howe, etc. Solos. But there's a guy named Michael Lee Firkins that's a monster guitar player. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but if you haven't, you
He's got that sort of like a little bit of country, but he's almost like an extreme Eric Johnson.
Yeah, something like that. And if the Allman Brothers had him in that band, if they would love it. He can sing and play slide, and he's a
He's so
consummate.
good.
He's a master. That guy. And there are other people like that that I almost didn't mention him, and I should have. But um, yeah, I think when people come out and they're really into their technique and whatnot, they get to a point where either they have to sort of dummy it down to serve the song, or they have to create a music where they're able to keep pushing forward beyond where uh, people pushed in, back in the glory days of Shrapnel. But all I'm saying is pushing beyond there, some of that stuff was as far
Yeah.
as extreme as it could be, and still have something memorable about it.
I want to jump into the 90s, but before we do that, I want to take a little sidestep and ask you where did you grow up and where do you think you got the ambitious drive that you have had your whole life?
Well, my dad was a chief financial officer of a big insurance company, and he worked really hard to come from a, a very, I'd say, a fairly poor upbringing, go to college and become a CPA, and use his intellect and that drive to come from coming way back to pushing ahead. And so there really wasn't much of an option for me to although they let me take a semester off of college because this band I was in was going to LA and doing all kinds of playing some big gigs, and they let me take 6 months off to see how that would go. And funny enough, that's exactly what I wanted to see. I thought, well, if this is real, because we already had a number of record deal offers, and if this is real, then I want to be able to give it 100%. But I also thought I could be chasing this carrot a long time, you know. Uh, and
I'm here to testify that that is true, Your Honor.
okay, well, there you go. Uh, and so
that reality is a true one.
yeah. So I mean, I'm glad that at 19, or 19, I guess I figured that out. But I give a lot of credit to my father and my brother and I had a young friend, Paul Mendelson, growing up, and we were buying records, and we were really we're checking out the guitar solos, and people used to come to my house, and I had was growing up, tons and tons of records, and I'd put the needle down and I go right to the guitar solos and play 30, 40 seconds of the song and then move on to something else. And and some people were like, they thought that was badass because they were guitar players and they wanted to hear that stuff. And other people would say, why don't you ever let the needle sit down there? And so once I heard something, once or twice, and I had a part of the song that I really liked, I go to that part of the song and listen to it. So I was obsessed with guitar players. My brother was. We both really, uh, we discovered a lot of the famous guitar players, way before anybody had heard of them, just by being, ear to the ground. And like I think I was maybe I'm 65 now, and I think I might have been in seventh, maybe eighth grade when I found, Gary Moore,
Oh yeah.
and then the same age when I found Alan Holdsworth.
Wow.
When I say found, I mean as a young kid in school looking for records to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, we were out there buying anything that we could get our hands on that had superior guitar playing, and that was I have to say, I mean, we like good songs, but it was also important, that the guitar player was really good. That's why somebody like Frank Marino or I mean, Bill Nilsson and Bebop Deluxe, there were a lot of great guitar players out there. The era that didn't probably quite get the recognition that they deserved, uh, because that they were actually probably in many cases so brilliant that they had many other things that they could do and many other interests musically. So we had some really good guys that skipped out of the industry by the time the 80s came. And maybe they'd come back and do something, or maybe they went into a completely different genre of music. But yeah, there were a lot of guys out there. I mean, maybe even Alan Holdsworth, he got off on a tangent where he was playing guitar synthesizer,
Right.
and because I think he was probably bored. I remember I was driving around with him in 1982 or thereabouts, I think 82, and he, uh, I was mentioning all the great stuff I thought he had done and these solos on these songs in the Tony Williams lifetime and whatnot. He wasn't impressed with himself at all.
Huh.
I think that's the way it is with a lot of these guys. When they get to be that great, they either leave the industry or because they have other talents, or they just completely go in a different musical direction. I'm sure there's a lot of guitar players where you'd think like, man, why wouldn't you just go back and do more of that? You know, why are you doing
Here
that now? Yeah, go ahead.
Hearing you talk about guitar players that you admire that didn't get their due feels like something that could have motivated you to sign some people, and it seems to me that that has got to be every release for you. And I want to go back to like the earliest point of you starting the label, but there must have been so many occasions where you were like, this is a great piece of musical work.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Why aren't a million people loving it?
Right. Well, that was the thing, and also I think a lot of people have this kind of snobbery, but like I would get into a band, and if the band became huge, I sort of jumped off the train and looked for somebody else.
Right.
In most cases, in some cases, no, but in a lot of cases, I just sort of lost interest. Like I was a huge fan of Fleetwood Mac, and then as soon as they hit the charts, around 1977, 78, it wasn't like I didn't enjoy the music, but it didn't have as much meaning because it was everybody's music. So there, a lot of the Shrapnel stuff, it was you know, something that some guys maybe couldn't play with their girlfriends in the car to get them in the mood, you know. But with the door shut, they could plug their guitar in and dream and turn the thing on and jam, you know.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. What you said is correct. It was sort of being the champion of an underdog, direction. And like I said, in 1980, when I started the labels were just starting to think that there could be a heavy metal resurgence, but it was sort of like kind of winding down for a lot of those bands. And even ZZ Top, they weren't in there. They were never heavy metal, but like 1980 probably wasn't the best year for ZZ Top. They
Right.
had to reinvent themselves and come back and do such a great job of it. But in 1980, it was really new wave artists, you know, uh, disco music, stuff like that. I think that they had huge market shares, and they're just really. I really wanted to find the next guitar player who was going to be the guy that kind of was a game changer. And a lot of the guys that I found were game changers. Not any of them, ended up, you know, being in a commercial music, vehicle like Van Halen, or even like Jimi Hendrix. But a lot of those artists on my label sold a lot of guitars and a lot of strings and a lot of pedals,
Yeah.
and influenced a lot of people. Ingve certainly was. I mean, it's amazing, but most of the artists I have, there are guys out there who that's their guy, you know, and
Yeah.
it's not unanimous, like, oh, this is the best guy that ever was on Shrapnel. It's really a big debate among a lot of people that will have loved this music. They they like this guy more than that guy, and uh, and it's kind of cool because there were just a lot of really really great players at the time, and I wanted to see. I mean, honestly, it was selfish. I was a record buyer, and I'm like, I go to the record store and come back empty-handed and go, man, this hasn't happened in 10 years. What's going on
Right.
here? And I bought Iron Maiden, when it as an import, I think maybe when it came out, I'm not sure, but yeah, I was seeing some some little rumblings, coming from over there, and it was really me as a United States citizen going, well, why is all this stuff happening in the UK and Germany and not here? You know, how could Alan Holdsworth, Gary Moore, Michael Schenker, Uli John Roth, etc., you know, exist over there? And where are all those guys, you know, except for Van Halen at the time? Where are all those guys? We had Al Di Meola, but he was in in a jazz fusion genre. And I certainly
Right.
listened to those records a lot back in there. Even Romantic Warrior, Return to Forever, that's got some great Al Di Meola guitar playing on it. We had our guys, but it seemed like there was more of a concerted effort over there to recognize guitar greatness than there was over here. There weren't as many guys in bigger groups that could play like that. I mean, Neil Schon certainly was quite a guitar player, but he always played for the song, and he had to have his side projects so he could really show his other interests.
Right. Um, One other thing I want to make sure to touch on is when you started your label, it's 1980, and we take for granted now. It's like, oh, I want to do this, that, or the other. You can get on the computer and learn how to do it. There are 100,000 people out there that want to tell you exactly how to do it.
Yes.
Um, how were you paying attention leading up to that point, or did you turn a corner and say, all right, I've got to figure this out now?
Oh, well, could you rephrase that question?
Well, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of moving parts with releasing a record, forming a business. I know you went to school, but specifically related to the music business, finding distro, you know having everything printed, different
Oh, I see.
manufacturers
Well, yeah,
possibly.
yeah. I luckily in college had this professor. His name was John Capel, and he had a class called New Venture Management, and it was 7 to 10 o'clock at night, one day a week. And he managed to get one self-made guy in there every week, and we could grill the guy for 3 hours, you know,
Wow.
about what he did to make it and how he started. And it was such a great course, very influential. Because when I got, even though I, took all the other courses in college, it was actually seeing, we probably had, we probably had a dozen of these guys, or more that semester. And, some of these guys actually were, you know, and became world famous, their companies. And most of them, at the time were already, huge. But this guy, through his education and his career as a businessman, he was able to get these guys to come in and talk. And later on, I went back to that school, I think, 2 times and talked over, a wide, long period of time. But it was just great to have a mentor. When I say mentor, I don't mean somebody you're calling every day. And I just mean to hear a guy's testimony of, God, here I was with $5 and I wanted to start a restaurant chain or whatever. And
Right.
here's how I went and got the money, and here's how I first approached it. And so, after hearing all these guys break down, their chain to success, it really wasn't intimidating for me to say,
Surely
like,
there must have been like at least some common thread in every one of those stories as
absolutely.
well.
Yeah, everybody had a passion. Everybody wanted to do something better. Everybody was willing to go for broke. And that's kind of where I was at. I thought, well, if there are people, if I like this music, there's got to be other people out there that like this music. And if I'm starving for this music, there's got to be other people who are starving for this music. And I realized that every town had a guitar player that was unanimously the guy. And so I thought to myself, well, I can't afford a lot of money on promotion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call every music magazine, in the United States, and put the challenge out to the editor and say, I'm looking for the 10 best guitarists in the United States in a heavy metal, hard rock context. You think you guys have anybody that's that good? Oh yeah, you kidding me? Yeah, we got a guy. And so I go, I call BAM magazine, and then the guy at BAM would say, hey, there's a magazine in Oregon called Two Louis, and I call Two Louis magazine, and then I'd say after all that, I go, hey, who's the guy? Who's in Washington? Oh yeah, you want the Rocket magazine in Washington? So I just went up and
Yeah.
down the coast and East Coast and Mid America, whatever, and found all these magazines, and I got them on board with helping me find guys. So most of the magazines ran a free article for me about a guy that was looking for the greatest. And the sad thing is that when the LA Times took it in the Sunday edition of uh, the paper, which is where the big music column would be every week, uh, the headline was, "Can you blow away Eddie Van Halen? If so, Mike Varney wants you." And so this was 82 or so, 83, and it was kind of embarrassing because that was Van Halen's that'd be the newspaper.
Right.
And I thought, no,
Feels a little mercenary.
say it again. Yeah,
Feels a little mercenary
yeah,
on
I
their
wasn't
part.
trying to blow away Eddie Van Halen. That had nothing to do with it. I
Right.
I just wanted to know, you know, who was out there. I wanted to beat the bushes and see what came out. And it was exciting to go out there and uh, try to stir something up in places I've never been. I've never been to Maryville, Indiana, but Night Rock News was there, and they ran a thing about it. And uh, and so that's how I did the marketing. I just found these music magazines state by state, and not all of them were included, but I mean, yeah, I got out to Texas and found magazines all over the place and got guys on board. Uh, there's a magazine called Buddy Magazine back then in Texas, and they did something. So all this stuff started coming out, and all these tapes started coming to me because when you think about it, when you start a label, where are you going to find these guys? So I
Right.
thought, well, there's no better place than right in the heartland, of America, through the regional magazines, because I figured there'd be kind of a loyalist, or there'd be kind of a hey, this is my town. Of course we got a guy that's world class. He's our guy. He's better than anybody. That's because he's from Austin, Texas,
From here. Right.
whatever. And so they were really, excited to help me. And then the greatest break I got was I just put out this record. Jeff Pilson was the singer before I introduced him to Don Dokken and George Lynch. He was singing and playing bass in this project, and um, it was this thing called Rock Justice, which was I alluded to. It was a live record that was not really. We didn't know it was being recorded to be to be released. It was
Right.
supposedly just kind of recorded for our own critique, but it ended up being the record, and that was a whole other story. But having put out that record, I thought, well, it didn't do that well as an artist. I'm lucky that I failed by the age of 20, and had a chance to move on. But what happened with that record is that Rolling Stone got it, and they said something cool about me, and Guitar Player magazine saw an article about me in BAM magazine, and the record that was re-released on EMI had just been released, and Jazz Obrecht, who was one of the editors of Guitar Player, he contacted me and with a letter, and he said, "Hey, when you find these guys, don't forget about us." Or something. He goes, "I want to know. I want to hear this stuff too. I want to hear it."
Yeah.
So I then sent him the record that I just did, and he thought it was pretty cool. And so I think they reviewed that, and he was such a cool guy. He put me in the readers poll of Guitar Player magazine that year. So every year there'd be a readers poll of all the great guitar players, and it was funny. But he put me in there, and not that I deserved to be in there, but it was cool that he did, because and EMI took out an ad on the front cover of Billboard with me holding it my '64 Pelham Blue SG, and
Oh.
So for a guy who didn't not known for having a music career, I was on the front page of Billboard. I was, in the Guitar Player magazine readers poll as a guitar player, and I played with a lot of artists, quite a few people that went on and had huge careers. There's a legendary spaghetti dinner where three unknown bands were going to play. One of them was my band with Jeff Pilson and those guys, and another one was my friend Mark Robertson, who's in had a prog band called Cairo on Magna Carta, which was he's an amazing keyboard player. We went over to a spaghetti dinner at Eric Martin's house, who would
Oh.
later be the singer of Mr. Big, and and I ended up introducing. It's funny too because I introduced him to Billy Sheehan and Paul Gilbert, and I introduced Jeff to Don and George, and both those things were well, yeah, I'd say probably multi-platinum. That single, Mr. Biggs, I think was number one. So anyway, yeah, so that little spaghetti dinner spawned Satriani, the platinum guitarist, Jeff Pilson, his multi-platinum Doc, and Eric Martin, and his huge career as a singer, out of one little spaghetti dinner and for one gig, at you know in San Francisco. So uh, Jazz Oberg, a Guitar Player magazine, invited me down to the magazine for a party, and I said, "Can I bring a couple of young shredder?" I didn't say shredders, but young hot shots or whatever. He goes, "Yeah, I'd bring them down." So they had a big jam there, and I sat next to legendary session bassist Carol Kay
Oh.
at dinner, which was amazing. To be able to talk to someone like that for a few hours, off and on, when people weren't coming up to her and rightfully telling her what an amazing musician she was, one of the Wrecking Crew. And so my guys got up there and they were great. And I saw the one of the publishers, and it was Don Men, and I cornered him. Tom Wheeler, I guess it was. I think Tom Wheeler maybe and Don Men, but Tom Wheeler, I guess, was the first guy. I just said, I've been reading your magazine for years, and I said, I pick it up and I see, you know, a guy with his Ferrari, you know, uh, that's platinum, or a guy in his castle in England. I said, but the guys that are buying your magazine are guys that are busting their ass, and a lot of them have dreams of getting out of that crappy job and being a career musician. I said, but there's really nothing in your magazine that speaks to them. You know, that I said, if you had something of where people consider these people their peers and can see somebody getting recognition in guitar player and then that leading to something else, you'd have all these people that would open up that magazine every month and go right to that and go, hey, who are the next three guys? Who are these guys? And you get a lot of interest in the community. And the guy said, I like it. And he said, just write a write a write a sample column. So I did, and he said, you're hired. And so from there, I think I did a cover. I think it was an Iron Maiden cover. I think a Judas Priest cover, and maybe even a Scorpions cover. If they weren't covers, they were major articles in there. And I think they might have been covers or close to it. So I did other articles for them as well, interviews with artists. Did a Tony Iommi one that never came out. Um,
Oh, wow.
he was just so sarcastic and wasn't taking it seriously, and
Right.
made me feel like I must be the worst interviewer. But when Guitar Player put out their coffee table book, there's a picture of me at age 22, 23, 23, I guess, interviewing Iron Maiden, and they were all around the same age, and they didn't seem to have a big problem with it. So, but
Right.
anyway, it was Jazz Obrecht, and he really kind of opened the door for things, and allowed things to for me to get to Guitar Player and hit them up and have them agree to let me be a columnist. But yeah, you did allude to something earlier, mentioning, yeah, I guess I had a lot of ambition. One of my somebody
Well,
told,
yeah, as you're telling the story, I'm like, this is an incredible amount of hustle.
yeah, I guess maybe because I found a girl that I loved and I didn't want to, I wanted to be able to support her. I didn't want her working at a strip club. I'm kidding.
Sure.
But nothing happening against that. If that's if that's paying the bills, I don't want to trying to insult anybody. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I just really, I guess I wanted to be an adult. I really felt like I need to. be responsible, and I needed to be able to, figure something out. And somebody did an interview with me years ago, and I said, if I would have seen all the barriers to having success as a record label, I probably never would have done it. And I said, but I guess if you don't see barriers, you can walk right through them. And that's sort of what it was like. I seemed to do things that at the time, took a lot of courage to look somebody in the eye and tell them, hey, I can do this. I want to do this. Do you want to do this or whatever? And I never did any drugs. I never drank. I was, stone cold sober though from then till now. And part of that was, originally was just religiously or whatever. Personally, I didn't feel like that was for me, and health wise, whatever. But I also thought if I'm going to convince somebody that, you know, they should work with me, I'm not going to be out there, getting hammered with them on the weekend. And plenty of
Right.
record label guys have had much bigger successes by comporting themselves as such. But that wasn't me, and I got made fun of a lot for that too. In fact, Greg Howe and I always joke around. Um, I think he came to the studio, and I said something like, "I think you're the first artist I've had here who smokes." And this is like almost 40 years ago, and I don't know if I made him feel like a derelict or if he was laughing at me or what, but you know, it's true. All these guys that I found, they were all pretty much straight edge. As time grew on, they'd probably discovered drinking now and then or whatever socially, but like, you know, they were so driven. And I was talking recently, and you know, if you look at a lot of these shrapnel artists, they're still out there. If
Yeah.
you look at a lot of artists that had major label deals, and then uh, the record failed, right? Those guys are running banks, or they're working as delivery drivers for Uber. But
Sure.
they're in other words, they're for a lot of people who don't make it huge. There's really no middle ground, and they've had to shift directions, and they've grown up, and they've gone back to college, or they've got a good job, or they created a business that's doing really well. Uh, but a lot of the shrapnel artists, the majority of them, any of them that got a taste of the success. I had some great artists that came out after the sunset, you know,
Right.
and those guys unfortunately just were out at the wrong time. And if they'd come out earlier, they would have been another, it would have been a different story for them. But uh, a lot of these guys that they're still out there. Richie Kotzen is out there doing great. Greg Howe's always out there doing. Macalpine's out there. Vinnie Moore's in UFO. Marty Friedman's, had been a TV personality in Japan. He's still making records. And Jason Becker with Lou Gehrig's disease, has continued to make records and make records by blinking, you know, songs
His
out.
story is astounding.
Yeah, it's astounding. And so you look at someone like Jason and you go, wow, I've known other guys who've been flapping their gums about making a record for as long as Jason's had Lou Gehrig's disease, and his musical output's greater. And he's
Right.
had to enter notes, you know, by blinking. I think by blinking his eyes, or by looking at you know uh, something on the computer. It's a technology that I'm unfamiliar with the finer details. But I mean, the fact that Jason's doing that all these guys, Richie and Greg Howe and all the people I mentioned, plus a lot more, uh, it's because I was able to identify certain traits in these guys when they were young. And I thought, if I hand this guy the ball, he's taking it for a touchdown, you know. And that's really what it was like for me. I'd have 200 tapes sitting in front of me, and I have to go through them, and that was not always fun, especially when they wrapped them up hermetically, and cutting my fingers on them, trying to get them out of the five layers of stuff they're wrapped in. And but yeah, that to pick those guys out of the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of demos we received, and I mean thousands. And I go to the post office, and they'd have a big bin waiting for me. And I take it home
Right.
and go out again a week later. I got another zillion things. So pick those guys out of all those people. And I'm not saying that other guys I passed on uh, didn't have great careers or couldn't have great careers, but most of the people that I chose, uh, were not only exceptional, but it was really the drive. And I got to the point where, okay, Jason Becker's 16. 6 months later, he turned 17. Wow, look at the jump he made in his musicality. You know, Richie Kotzen was, 18 or whatever, and then he turns 19, and there's this huge jump. And Paul Gilbert was 15, and, you know, between 15 and 19, I heard all this progress. So I was always following and tracking, a bunch of guitar players and watching to see how they developed in those formative years. And you know, to see if they were, congenial and could they go out there and shake hands and kiss babies. And not all of them are the best at that, but they are nice people nonetheless. There are not too many people that I signed that weren't great people too. There are a few, but
Is there
that's not the
anyone
subject of this interview. Yeah.
is there anyone that you feel comfortable naming that you passed on signing or put or producing or what being involved in professionally that you wish you would have?
Oh, well, all kinds of people. So as I mentioned, I knew Joe Satriani, going back. Probably saw him first play back in the 70s.
From
And
the Bay Area, right?
yeah, and I think he makes a wisecrack about me at the end of the outtakes on Jason Becker's movie. But yeah, Joe approached me and he said, "Hey, I'm making this instrumental thing on my 4 track. I think it was a 4 track." And he said, "I just want to put some records out there, just get something out there." And he didn't say, "Will you put my record out?" He said, "Hey, can you tell me where I need to go to do this?" So I I said, "Yeah, here's where I go make my album covers. Here's where I go to get the vinyl press. I use this guy for mastering, whatever. Just whatever I had, I gave him the information, and he sent me one of the records when it was done. And out of a huge record collection of vinyl that I had, which has now become a CD collection, that was one of the few records I kept. That and Steve Morris. Steve Morris sent me this record that they made as a college project at Miami in Miami, and it was a white cover with Dixie Dregs written on it, and he wrote on it, "Mike, remember this is just a demo." Steve Morse. So that's that Satriani record, that Steve Morse thing. Yeah, there were a lot of artists that I was really had my the thing really was that most of these guys that I signed, they kept hitting me with demos and more and improving and more and more and improving. And so I was noting that and saying, okay, God, from 15 to 17, look where you've gone. And, you know, you just could kind of see who the lifers were, and, if it was a guy that was getting hammered all the time and whatnot, I might at that point say, this guy could get, lost in the shuffle. He smokes too much pot or he drinks too much or whatever. I was really straight edge, and so, uh, I guess maybe that's not quite the word, but I just say, very sober. And yeah, these guys that I signed, they wanted it so bad, and you could tell. And I was telling someone recently that Greg Howe and Richie Kotzen, you know, I'd go to the mail, there'd be a couple of Richie Kotzen songs. Go to the mail the next day, there's a couple of Greg Howe songs. Go there the next day, there's a new Richie Kotzen song. Uh, Go there the next day, there's a new Greg Howe song. I mean, these guys were like running factories practically just to make demos so they could get a record deal. And they really, they really worked really hard, and you could just see, that they weren't going to give up. Tony Macalpine, he's still out there playing and doing all kinds of stuff, and he was in Steve Vai's band for years. But you know, these guys not only had the drive, but they were good enough, and they looked good. They all had they were all the whole package. And when
Right.
for a while there, when Taylor Swift became big, all these people, my dentist, hey, listen, I've got this young girl. hey, anybody,
Yep.
guy at the pizza parlor, whatever. Hey, I got this girl. So I finally just said, look, every record label has got, dozens of these coming in every week. And I said, so yeah, the girl you showed me, she's cute. Yeah, yeah, she sings well. That's a given. Now the question is, you know, how good of a songwriter is she? And then the
Right.
question becomes, how many great songs does she have? And how many great songs will she have next year? And so you start off with, 500 of these girls, hypothetically, and then they all look great. So, that doesn't even matter. I should say most of them do. And then you strip it down until you finally find the one that looks great, that writes great songs, that writes a lot of great songs, and that's driven. And then occasionally you find someone who's not a classic beauty, but they have so much soul and so much drive and so much personality that you can't deny them. And that's, I'm not trying to be I'm not trying
Of
to sound
course.
shallow here, but as someone who's,
I don't think anyone would ever accuse show business of being equal
yeah,
opportunity.
I mean, in other words, if somebody came up and and it was amazing and looked the antithesis of, you know, a quote star, luckily we're in a society now where somebody would recognize that as a bonus. It's like,
Right.
wait a minute, this person wasn't blessed with, classic, the great looks, but they're blessed with a lot more. And, so, doesn't matter
The
what
other
they,
th-
what they look
the
like.
other thing that I think people consider, I'm sure that you would be able to testify to this, is if someone does meet with great success, are they going to be able to handle it
Right.
and
Exactly.
continue, or is it going to be one and done because fill in the blank
No, no, that
pressures?
I've strayed away from so many things just by somebody says two or three things to me, and I go, okay, this is not going to work, and this is going to be a problem, and it might be the 50-year-old blues guy that says, you know, actually, blues is not. I take that back. Because blues, somebody could break into the blues market right now with an undeniable voice and guitar voice, and a great songwriter, and still that's one of the genres. That's why I like blues and prog rock and fusion, because it really wasn't sexist. It wasn't, well, maybe a little sexist, but hey, there's so many great girl guitar players, female guitar players right now. There's that stereotype is gone now. There's
It's great. Yeah,
yeah,
I love
it's awesome that's opened up. But yeah, there's just I don't know.
it. Well, there certainly have been plenty of examples of musicians couldn't who just can't handle their
Yeah, yeah. Well,
business.
exactly. Like I said, that would have come out of the personality somewhere during the interview process of having hours of phone calls with these guys before I ever, most cases ever signed them. Ingve was not one of those guys. Ingve was the first real astounding guy that came across my path, and we had some letters back and forth, and he took a leap of faith and got on a plane and came out to L.A. and joined Steeler, and so in that case, I really didn't know him that well, but most of these other guys I knew pretty darn well before I ever ended up making a record with them. We'd have lots of conversations, and I'd ask him questions. One artist, Tony Curtis, who's a great blues rock artist here in Vegas, I've been working with for years. I was talking to him, and I said, what do you want to accomplish in the next few years or something? He said, my goal is not to be a huge star. My goal is to work really hard and be a little further ahead in my career every year. And I thought, wow, that's a really great, that's a great work ethic. It's like, not going to, let any kind of delusion or, you know, anything other than where I am right now and getting to the next rung so I can get to the next rung. And then I'll worry about being on top when those rungs lead me to get there. It's just,
Right.
it's great rather than somebody looking at you and go, yeah, I'm huge. I'm going to be a star. I'm going to be famous. I'm better than everybody. Just somebody who just says, hey, I want to work really hard and I want to get up on the next rung every year, and that's the goal. And I thought that is a really great way of looking at things. It's one thing to want to be huge, but you got to do the work to get there. And there are steps and phases to get there, and just someone acknowledging that. So I know one
For
of the
sure.
things he wanted to do was get over to Europe, and the label I hooked him up with is called Pro Vogue Mascot, and they've become a huge label. I used to bring them a lot of their records between Magna Carta, Shrapnel, and Tone Center labels that we own. Pete Morticelli, my partner at Magna Carta, the man who founded it and ran it, we would bring a lot of stuff over to Mascot, and they would do really well with it. And now Mascot's they've done such a great job. They they have a Grammy nominated record with Eric Gales right now, who I worked with and wrote songs with for many years. They had a Billboard #1 record and blues with Eric Gales this last year. They've worked with Warren Haynes, and I brought Robin Ford there originally. They're working with Robin Ford, or they have worked with Robin Ford. They've worked with Steve Lukather. I mean, it's become a really great, a great label and a lot of great guitar music too.
Because you mentioned him just a few moments ago, will you tell me what went through your mind the first time you heard Yngwie's guitar playing?
Well, bear in mind, I was awfully young when I first heard him. I guess I was probably 24, maybe 23, 24. And my friend Bill Burkhart at the Record Exchange, which was the epicenter of heavy metal, for the West Coast import store, uh, a guy came into his shop from Sweden, a student, and he said, "Hey, listen to this." And he played him a tape of Yngwie's Rising Force. So I was over there, and this guy goes, "You got to hear this guitar player, Mike. This guy's something." And I heard it, and I thought, "Wow, this guy really is something." He's 18 or whatever. So, but I thought, well, who am I? At the time, I'd only had 5 releases out or 4 releases. I thought, man, getting someone to come over from a foreign country and dealing with the immigration to get them here legally so they can work and record, and man, that just seems like a lot of work, and a lot of money, and it just seemed too arduous a task for me to approach in that early stages of my business.
Sure.
But there was a turning point where I just decided not to be an artist anymore, and was just going to do the record business full time. And then that year, I think I put out maybe 7 records. And so with those 7 records came, I started to be able to forecast, some better numbers and have more capital to work with. And so by the time that Yngwie, a few months later, sent me his demo for a consideration of being in the Spotlight column in Guitar Player magazine, by then, I already had some other records in the works and some money in the pipeline, and I felt like, okay, I can take a shot now and step things up a little bit. And originally, I wanted to do an instrumental record with him, Leonard Hayes from Y&T, who I played with in that musical I mentioned earlier. Him and Billy Sheehan on bass, and it would have been, other than Talus, it would have been, probably the first like session like that Billy Sheehan would have done. But it turned out where Ron Keel came up and said, "Hey, I'm already doing great business at these clubs in LA. I'm starting to do pretty well, and we just need that guitar hero that's the undeniable guy." And I played him a handful of guys, and he said, "I want this guy," and that was Yngwie. And so,
Right.
and we didn't really know Yngwie was that, because I hadn't talked to him that much. I didn't realize that he was that dedicated to his own direction. Not just being a great guitar player, but being a composer. So I
He's
think he
nobody's
just wanted to
sideman.
come out to LA, and I think he was smart and and realized, hey, all I have to do is get out in these big clubs and play, and someone's going to come for me. And so Shrapnel and Steeler were sort of a stepping stone, for Ingve.
Right.
And I didn't sign Ingve for a bunch of records. I thought this guy's a huge talent. I've only been in business a couple of years. Who am I to try to tie this guy up for a bunch of records? So I just brought him out to do the one record, and so that's that. I mean, honestly, he was one of the most influential guitar players, you know, and probably the most influential guitar player from 1983 to I don't know when the cutoff would even be.
Yeah.
Might still be today for a lot of people. But
Agreed.
no, he was a game changer. He was exactly the kind of artist I was hoping to find.
Right. Let's jump to 1990. I know I don't want to keep you for hours here, but I want to talk to I want to talk to you about the gear shift.
Yep.
Um and when you started putting out blues records and sort of like non records that were didn't necessarily conform to the previous ideology of Shrapnel.
Yeah. What happened was I hadn't been playing guitar during the Shrapnel Shred years. Uh, I didn't want to. Who'd want to pick up a guitar if you're in the studio producing records like that? It wasn't very inspiring to me because I didn't have the time in my parents' house where I could sit and practice every day and watch YouTube videos and have all the secrets unlocked. Um, and so, all of a sudden I have, 5 new guitar releases and I'm coming out with them and it's like, wow, nobody's that excited. I went to the convention and it was called the Concrete Foundations Forum. And in my hotel room, I think they had Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, maybe Alice in Chains playing through you know, the TV for their channel. They took over this hotel and they had a channel on the TV's network there and just
Right.
playing this music. And I thought, what is this? You know, uh, it was a storm coming from Seattle and it was just had not even really made it out yet. And I'm watching these bands on my TV and I'm like, where are the guitar solos? I mean, there were some, but nothing like what had been. And then, the orders started getting less and there weren't, the focus was taken off that. And, and so I thought, well, as a fan, I'm really into, blues guitar. And,
Right.
you know, you know, uh, I know there's got to be some really great guys out there that play blues. And then I thought, well, God, my influence is Pat Travers and Leslie West and Rick Derringer. Those guys are out there and they need labels. So I got, probably did a dozen Pat Travers records altogether and probably did, maybe 5 Rick Derringer records. I'd have to go back and count them. And then, probably the same with Leslie West, maybe 5 records. Um, and then started finding some new artists like Mike Inesco and the Blindside Blues Band and helped put that band together. And yeah, I just kind of went to where that's stuff I was buying at that point in time. I wasn't buying shred stuff. And unlike a lot of people, from a songwriting point of view and from some other points of view, I immediately liked Nirvana. It's not like I was thinking, oh, these guys suck, you know.
Well, you had a history playing in a sort of
Yeah,
like proto punk band.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was in the very early phase. I mean, to play with the Ramones, that's early on. Um, yeah, and so I mean, open for the Ramones at Winterland. Um, yeah, it was a change, but I couldn't deny the music was really good. And so, as a fan, I went out and bought a lot of that stuff. And but I still love the guitar playing, and you know, I hadn't really. I grew up with those artists as some of my core artists that I just mentioned: Derringer, Travers, Leslie West. You know, I really liked John Butcher, and so got a chance to work with him. And you know, back on the Shrapnel side, I was thinking, well, I've been friends with Phil Mogg since 1977. Since I was a kid is when I met him. He came to the Whiskey with Rodney Bingenheimer to came backstage to talk to my punk band afterwards, and I had a conversation with him, and that started a friendship. And I found a guitar player for him in '82, and I actually found a guy that was my candidate to replace Shanker in '77 when he went missing. But by the time I brought the guy to Winterland, his name was Pat Giavoni. I brought him down there to Winterland, and Michael was in the dressing room when I walked backstage with my possible replacement. I told Phil about because Phil said, "Man, we need a guy." I said, "Well, I think I have one." And this is back in '77. So anyway, yeah, in the '90s, everything changed. I then did produce some records with Pete Way and Phil Mogg. UFO were probably my favorite, rock band. Montrose and maybe them and a couple others, back in that day. And so to work with Phil and Pete was great. And then I started working with Shanker and produced some MSG records and some Michael Schenker solo records. And then got UFO back together. We got them back together and I produced some UFO records. And so I was really living my best life. I went out to Macon, Georgia, the old Capricorn Studios, and we made a record with the Outlaws. And yeah,
How much of a treat was it for you to step into the studio as a producer with UFO?
yeah, it was a dream come true. The only thing that wasn't so much of a dream is that we didn't have songs written before we got in the studio, and so and that's just it. A lot of times, someone might compare a record that I did with some other record, and I'll think, yeah, well, that record had one of the top engineers in the world engineering it, and it had 35 songs pared down to 10 songs, before they ever went in the studio. So
Months of pre-production.
Michael would bring in some music. I'd arrange it with him with the idea that this is where the vocals could go. I did develop I guess it's some kind of a skill set where I could arrange music and know that when we put a singer on it, every part was going to be great and everything would work out. In other words, we never hit any brick walls. Every once in a while, we hit a bridge that was better than a chorus, and we had to do some doctoring there and editing. But generally speaking, we just work out the musical arrangements, and then Phil would then write lyrics and melodies. But we were doing this, pretty much on the spot. Most of it was done right there at the studio. So I think we did some really cool records. But I'm just, saying it in all fairness to the band, if they would have all been together like the old days, because it's one of these things where Michael's coming from Arizona, Phil's coming from England. It
Right.
wasn't like they were in a room playing together for 3 months and then making a record. Uh, but we made some cool music together, and it was just great working with these guys. And to meet Phil when I was a teenager, being a huge UFO fan, that was just a wild. It was just a really wild stroke of luck. And then to have him call me in '82 when he was looking for a guitar player again and saying, "Hey, have you got somebody?" And we had an open call at Peter Marino from this band Le Mans, great singer. He had a rehearsal hall, so he agreed to let Phil use it, and we just brought a bunch of guitar players up, and they auditioned for him. And he found this guy called Atomic Tommy McClendon, and Tommy was part Japanese, and Phil, you know, really liked Tommy, so Tommy went back and cut the Misdemeanor record with UFO, and that was in '82, '83. So I had a history with UFO going way back, considering they were probably my favorite band. It was that was a big deal for me, and to work with Pat Travers and Leslie West and Derringer and that Outlaws experience was great because I went there and while they were taking a break, I walked down to the corner and bought a guitar at the pawn shop and came in and Huey Thomason said, "Hey, do you want to play a song?" And I said, "Sure." I hadn't been practicing really at all at that point, and so we each took a solo on this tune, and I think it still stands up pretty good.
Oh,
To
that's
this,
amazing.
today. And the craziest thing is, I was sitting there with Greg Howe and Jason Becker during one of Greg's recordings, and Greg said, "You guys want to take some solos?" So I played. This is like David and two Goliaths. We each played a solo back to back on a song called "Party Favors," which was on the Greg Howe's How To record, and then Richie Kotzen and I co-wrote a song, and we both played on that. That was called "Things Remembered Never Die." So it was fun that every once in a while I get to play some guitar. Pat Travers put me on a couple tracks, which was nice. And it's funny though, because the manager of the Outlaws said, "Pretty smart of Huey to have the label owner play on the record." I said, "If you think this is the first guy to think of that," I said, he certainly wasn't. But I'm a pig, and I'll play on anything anybody asks me to play on it. But
I
yeah,
should have had Richard Branson on my V2 record.
yeah, that would have been great. What was the V2 record?
Alien Crime Syndicate. It was like
Oh,
kind of a,
like was it electronic rock? What was it?
no, it was rock music. It was a 2001 release, and
Okay, that's cool. I'm gonna look out for that.
it's sort of like riffy rock music
Wow,
with sing song choruses.
I think I would like that. And now you know what it's like to have a record on a major label. And it,
Oh, I was the guy that didn't realize, the guy in 45 minutes ago that realized at 20 that chasing the dragon was a tough road. I was
yeah,
the guy that didn't realize that.
you know what? I was just afraid, and you had no fear. There's the difference.
Well,
But I had no fear about starting a record company, was
right.
which was just as scary as putting all my eggs in a musician basket. Um, but yeah, and so the Huey Thomas, and after that went on to be in Leonard Skinner until he died, and then Chris Hicks, the other guitar player, joined Marshall Tucker about that same time, and he's been in that band probably 25 years. He's probably the best singing voice in that band, and a ripping guitar player. The Outlaws, when they were on Blues Bureau, that was a great lineup. In fact, oddly enough, the drummer was in a band called Mother's Finest, which was half
Oh,
black, half white hard rock band. And Mother's Finest
who else
play.
was in that band?
Say it again.
Who else was in that band?
Well, the guitar player's name was Mo or Oz. I can't remember. Um, the drummer was B.B. Borden. It was a black woman and a black man, both super soulful. So it was yeah, it was just, I don't think anybody else went out of that band and became huge. The band themselves are a legendary hard rock band. That they were one of the few, I'd say hard rock black bands. Obviously, but there's quite a few other ones, but they were really killing those really killing band. But yeah, when we played Winterland with Brian Ferry, they were one of the bands on the bill. So there I am, uh, you know, uh, 13 years later or whatever, and we're making a record with the drummer and the Outlaws in Macon, Georgia, in the old Capricorn Studios,
Hmm.
building. Um, but yeah, so that was some of the more fun things, well, many, many fun things. So I've got no complaints. I've had a really good life, and I've been able to do what I wanted to do, what my passion was, and I think that's really the name of the game. And some people are so much artist, mentality that they would never have as good a time helping others to, do their thing. But I would say that I certainly had, as much fun or more working with other people as I ever did doing anything myself.
In a 45-year career, uh, I think that's where we're at, right?
Yeah, that's exactly more than that, actually. Yeah.
It, but 45 to 50-year career, you've had so many amazing experiences, and probably been under a lot of uh in a lot of situations where you felt like you were under a bit of pressure. You had to make tough choices.
all the time. Yeah.
Right. Uh how many things would you do differently, and what things do you think you nailed?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. And I'm the last guy to, I mean, well, boy, those, why couldn't we have just ended the interview? I'm kidding. Um, well, I don't know. I think when things were moving along pretty quickly, um, I mean, I always tried to be a nice person, uh, but I probably could have been nicer. Although I think I was pretty nice, but that's all. So, in other words, um, I was pretty frank and brutally frank about things,
Right.
and
Well, I'm glad I never sent you a tape.
yeah, maybe I could have. Yeah, well, the picture in Guitar Player magazine, I'm scowling and looking out at the, and I'm thinking, I'm really saying, don't send me anything if you don't think it's great, you know.
Right.
So, don't
Fair
don't
enough.
don't waste my time. No, I'm kidding. I mean, yeah, guys would send stuff, and that's a big complaint now is that they say, oh yeah, they lowered the bar. Well, the bar was a lot better when, you could buy a record on Shrapnel and know you were going to get something really good, or buy a record on Metal Blade or Blue Note or whatever. And of course, Metal Blade and Blue Note are still putting out great records. They haven't stopped. I kind of stopped, but what I'm saying is that there's so many people out there that really like you have to. I came up with this one a while back. You have to have a driver's license to drive on the highway, but on the information superhighway, there's no license to keep you from
Yeah.
putting out garbage and littering the highway with stuff that makes people crash when that dentist wants to go out there and find those couple of cool records to you know connect him back with his past, and he goes on there and goes on one of these sites and sounds like Led Zeppelin. Oh yeah, I should buy it. Well, let me hear it first. Ooh, what's this? You know, and by the time people stumble on enough garbage that's not curated by anybody with any, you know, real taste in music or direction, you know, uh, it's unfortunate that dentist may go read his kids a nursery rhyme and never buy that cool record because there's so much stuff that really doesn't belong out there. Like people are putting stuff out there way worse than what a good artist demos would have been as finished product, recorded on garbage by someone without much talent. And it's nice for them. Yeah, here, look at my baby pictures. Okay, that's great. But I'm just saying that back in the day, if you bought a record on my label, you would know that the guy had to have some, extreme talent to be on
Yeah.
there. And that's the same with a lot of labels through history. You know by the label that you're going to get something good. There's a lot of labels like that. But now all the DIY stuff. I wish there was still some way to uh, give buyers and seekers of great music, more confidence in hunting for things. But there are some great curated radio stations on Sirius, and there's some place you can find things, and there's groups on Facebook you can find things. But I guess I'm just saying it's just that back in my day, to get a record deal, you had to be good.
Well, yeah, there was not, I mean, digital, you mentioned like digital social media and the internet and everything, but technology has allowed people to, you know, quantize,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
like
that's true. But I guess
time snap.
I don't have any problem with that because to me, entertainment is entertainment.
Right.
So if someone, however they do it, if you put it on and you're listening to it and you feel good, then I don't care if the guy auto-tuned his vocal. I don't care if he didn't play the drums in time, as long as they get it all together. And by the time my listening experience is ready to happen, I'm saying, yeah, that sounds good. But so to tie up your question, I think what I did feel good about is that I set out to find some great guitar players and put out some records with cool stuff. And so I accomplished that. Um, and,
Amen.
and I also wanted to be small. I didn't want to have a big label. I didn't want to have a ton of artists. I didn't want to have uh, a lot of things to keep me up at night, awake, worrying that somebody is screwing something up. So unfortunately, I guess you could say I don't know what you would say. I just really wanted to make sure that that I could keep an eye on everything and didn't want to have to be looking over my shoulder. So I never had a ton of employees. Uh, I never tried to be a big label. I didn't want to be a huge label. I had some opportunities where big companies would say, "Hey, well, why don't we do a deal together?" And I guess it was the fear of having somebody tell me that some crappy record needed to come out on my label, or And believe me, there
Right.
were a few of those that I take responsibility for, but not many, not many. But I mean, I wanted to be true to what my vision was and not somebody else's. And uh, there gets to be and also what I like musically is not usually what is on the top of the chart. So uh, and I realized if I put out records in a niche market, there's always going to be some market for it. Whereas if I swang for the fence over and over again, you know, the records might not be heard by anyone hardly.
Sure.
Because if you try to make a record that sounds like what's on the top of the charts and it doesn't get out there and doesn't resonate with enough people, it just dies and there's no career for the artist and nothing. So I really wanted to keep it small and keep it boutique, keep it of a quality, keep a quality control up there and create something I could be proud of. And so I guess that's the accomplishment. And there's really nothing I really wanted to do that I didn't do. Um,
I love that.
there are chances I had to say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said I love that.
Oh, well, yeah, there's not a lot of regrets, I wish there's probably a couple people out there that, came onto the label at times when it wasn't, great to be that kind of guitar player who weren't really successful. And I wish for them that things had been different. And, but in general, I've got a pretty good relationship with the majority of the artists that you would know. Uh, and I'm grateful for that.
Do you ever think about the the guitarist that probably exists less and less these days because young people are just sort of indoctrinated into using social media so much? Like you can probably watch the development of every musician, every new musician in real time these days. But do you ever think, or do you ever wonder, like, who slipped through the cracks? Who only ever played at home and
Uh,
never.
oh yeah, I do. I mean, some of the best guitar players I have ever heard did not want to be famous or did not want to get out of their comfort zone. And yeah, I won't mention any names because obviously they prefer it that way. But yeah, there are incredible people uh, that never ventured out of their house. And
Right.
a lot of times it's confidence. A lot of times, what I find with a lot of artists is, they could do a lot of things. They're like, Greg Howe is a very smart person. He could have done, you know, one of many things other than being a guitar player. And many of my
Right.
artists, I would say the same thing about. Very intelligent people. And so, yeah, there are a lot of people in the underbrush still that never did get heard. There are so many albums that were recorded and never released more than to, grandma, and sold in a local music store. There's great records. There's some great shred records out there I know that are probably easily, there's something I might have put out. And there's all kinds of stuff. And I think to myself, God, how could I have not, uh, how could I have not known about this guy? How did I miss that?
Right.
But generally speaking, I had more than my share of things to deal with.
Sure.
But thank you so much for having me on here. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that I hope you think I answered the questions okay.
I think you were fantastic. I think you have an inspiring story, and what a career. Thanks so much. When was the last time you picked up a guitar?
Last night,
Awesome.
I
That's
was
good
at
to
the
hear.
I was at the recording studio writing a song with Stoney Curtis, and we had both had the guitars out cranked up, and we were putting it together. And we recorded it with a drummer bass player. It came out really good. So I'm
Awesome.
still doing. That's what I'm doing now in my retirement, basically.
Awesome. Can we expect a solo record?
You never know. It would, if I put one out, it would probably be called, Mike Varney, the Vanity Album. But
think of the guest list you could have.
Well, you know what? There is that. I could, instead of just being blown away privately, I could do it in public and have everybody pound me by being better. But
make them all play bass.
You never know. It was good. Good. Yeah, there you go. It was good to make your acquaintance, and I hope I get to meet you in person sometime.
Oh yeah, thanks. I should thank Nils for introducing us. So.
Yep, Nils is an awesome guy, and he's got a really cool band, and hopefully, Velvet Chains will be at a venue near you soon.
Indeed. All right, I'm going to kill this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.